The northern wind howled through the thin wooden walls as Elias heard it, a sound, not an animal. It was like a human voice, dragging, choking, almost dying. He reached for the Sharps 50, stepped out onto the porch into the blinding snowstorm. On the white ground, smeared with blackened blood, a small figure was crawling toward his door. The wind bit hard as Elias stepped off the porch, rifle in hand, his boots crunching over frozen dirt. He moved fast, instinct guiding his feet through the whiteout. The figure ahead sagged with each drag forward, like it was running out of reasons to crawl. He knelt beside it, a girl, young, Lakota, maybe 17. Her face was beaten, one eye nearly swollen shut, dried blood crusting her lip. Her hands were bound behind her with rawhide, wrists red and raw from struggling. The dress she wore was torn and soaked through. She'd been crawling through snow with broken ribs, maybe worse. Whoever did this didn't just want her gone, they wanted her to suffer first. He looked around, nothing but wind and pines, no hoofbeats, no shadows. Whoever dumped her here had vanished into the storm. Smart move now would be to go back inside, pretend he never saw her. But Smart had never sat right with Elias, not since the day his son died waiting for medicine that never came. He reached down to check her pulse. Weak, but there. Then he saw it, a necklace, half buried beneath her collar. Beaded, with small, uneven knots, handmade by someone who didn't care much for symmetry, but cared deeply for the girl wearing it. He had made one just like it, years ago, for Micah, his boy. If you were Elias, would you open your door to a stranger in such a brutal world? Let us know what your heart would tell you. Before the fever took him, before the snow sealed the door shut and the world went quiet, before everything turned to ash. His throat tightened. This girl, whatever she was caught in, she didn't deserve to die like that, not like Micah.
He slung his rifle behind his back and reached down again. "I gotcha," he muttered. His arm slid under her, lifting her gently from the ice. She didn't stir, but a faint breath ghosted past her lips. As he carried her back toward the cabin, the wind screamed louder, like it knew what he was doing, like it didn't approve. But Elias didn't stop. "Not tonight," he whispered. "Not on my watch." The cabin door slammed shut behind him, blocking out the wind but not the weight of what he'd just done. Elias laid the girl down on the table he used for butchering game. It wasn't meant for people, but he hadn't treated a person in years, not since Micah. She was barely breathing, skin pale, trembling. Her fingers were stiff with frostbite. He grabbed a wool blanket from the cot and wrapped it around her shoulders, then moved fast, stoking the stove, ladling hot water into a tin basin, dragging the medical kit from beneath the floorboards. Most men out here didn't own morphine or surgical thread. Elias had both. He had learned the hard way. The dress was stuck to her side with dried blood. He soaked the fabric, peeled it away inch by inch. Bruises bloomed across her ribs. Rawhide bindings bit into her wrists. Her shoulder looked dislocated. Then he saw it, deep on her back, just beneath the left shoulder blade. A burn, branded flesh, shaped like a crude cross, seared into the skin not long ago. Still red, still blistering. He drew in a sharp breath. This wasn't a tribal mark. This wasn't ceremonial. This was punishment. Someone had tortured her. He washed the wound, applied carbolic, popped her shoulder back into place with a sickening crack. She twitched, but didn't wake. Next came the wrists. He sliced the bindings, careful not to cut skin, then rubbed salve into the angry red grooves. They'd scar. She'd never have full feeling in her hands again. But she'd live, if she made it through the night. He forced a few sips of hot broth between her lips. Most of it spilled down her chin. Elias sat back, exhausted, fingers trembling. He hadn't realized how cold his own body was until now.
He studied her face. She was young, too young for this kind of hell. Outside, the wind howled again, longer this time, like it was warning him. Something had dumped this girl on his land like garbage, and something, or someone, might be coming back to finish the job. He looked at his rifle leaning against the wall, then at the girl, then at the fire. "Whatever storm you brought with you, girl," he murmured, "I reckon it's already too late to shut the door." She moaned sometime before first light, not loud, just enough to freeze Elias in place, halfway through cleaning the dried blood from her hands. Her eyes fluttered, cracked open, just a sliver. "Taku," she whispered. Then another word, broken, raw. "Ate." Lakota. He didn't speak much of it, but that one he knew. Father. Then her head slumped sideways again, breath shallow. But she was alive, conscious, if only for a moment. Elias sat back, heart pounding harder than it should. He'd treated her like a body, a wound, a burden he hadn't asked for. But now he saw the girl. Someone's daughter. Someone who hadn't made it. He stepped to the window. Outside, the wind had eased, but snow still fell, soft and steady. The trail she left was almost gone. No one would know she'd ever reached his door, unless they already knew she'd run. Unless they were tracking her. He didn't like the thought, but it stuck to him like wet wool. Branded, beaten, tied and dumped. That wasn't random. Someone had wanted her silenced. And now she was in his cabin, wrapped in his blankets, breathing because he hadn't looked away. His eyes drifted to the rifle leaning against the wall, then to the fire, then back to her. He could still change his mind, drag her out, let the cold finish what someone else had started. But he didn't move. He stared at the girl, and for a moment
He saw Micah, that same color in the cheeks, that same small breath, fighting to keep going. His jaw clenched. This wasn't mercy anymore. This was a line. The kind of line a man only crosses once. He picked up the sharps, checked the chamber, slid another round inside. The girl murmured something again, too soft to catch. Elias didn't ask. He just stepped to the door, cracked it open, and stared into the gray beyond. If someone was coming, he'd meet them head on. And if they came for her, then, for the first time in 6 years, he had something worth killing for. When everything's on the line, what truly matters? Share your thoughts below. The girl didn't wake, but her body started to burn with fever. Elias kept the stove roaring, boiled every tool twice, and lit another lantern to flood the cabin with light. She lay pale and still on the butcher's table, sweat glistening despite the cold. He unwrapped the blanket, peeled back the bandages he'd applied the night before, and froze. Her left shoulder, just beneath the collarbone, was swollen deep and purple. He felt along the edge. Something was under the skin. Metal. He ran a blade across the flesh with clean hands, eyes squinting against the blood. A small caliber round, maybe .38, lodged just above the bone. He used forceps and pulled it free, slowly, carefully. She flinched, but didn't wake. He dropped the bloodied slug into a tin cup. Someone shot her. Not to kill, but to send a message. He stitched the wound and redressed it with trembling fingers. The image of that bullet rolling in the cup stuck with him. When he wiped her neck with a damp cloth, another detail caught his eye. Around her throat, beneath the bruise line, was a necklace, a woven rawhide cord holding a carved pendant. He held it to the light. An eagle feather, scrimshawed bone, old Lakota craftsmanship. And then, stitched to the inside seam of her torn dress, he found a small leather pouch, barely the size of a hand. Inside, a crumpled, hand-drawn map.
faded ink, arrows, Circles, symbols, and a second item wrapped in oiled cloth. A brass military button, U.S. Army issue. His hands stiffened. He looked from the button to the map to the girl. She wasn't just someone's daughter. She was carrying something, evidence, something someone risked killing her over. Elias stepped back, chest tight, ears ringing from the sudden weight of it all. He'd thought this was about mercy, but mercy doesn't come with a map and a bullet. This girl was a witness, and now so was he. She woke that afternoon, gasping. Elias dropped the tin cup he was holding. It clattered across the floor. Wanya tried to sit up, but collapsed again, gripping her stitched shoulder. Her eyes darted around the cabin, wild and frightened. "It's all right," Elias said gently, raising both hands. "You're safe. No soldiers, no one here but me." She blinked, breathing hard, then clutched the pendant at her neck like a reflex. "You speak Lakota?" she rasped. "Just enough to know when someone's asking for their father," he replied quietly. Tears welled in her eyes. "My father," she whispered. "They shot him. At the council. He stood, didn't draw, but they said he resisted." She coughed violently, and Elias helped her sip warm broth. She took 2 swallows, then pushed his hand away. "You don't have to believe me," she said, voice shaking. "But they'll come. I wasn't supposed to survive." Elias sat beside her. "I saw the map, and the button." Her eyes widened in panic. "Don't show it to anyone, not yet. It's not just places. It's proof. My father, he made me carry it, said if something happened, to find someone who still had honor." She looked at Elias, truly seeing him for the first time. "I didn't know where to go." He nodded slowly. "Name?" She hesitated. "Wanya, daughter of Tashunka Luta, Red Horse." Elias's breath caught. Red Horse. He'd heard the name whispered in the frontier bars, the last Lakota chief who believed peace could still be made with the U.S. Army. Rumor said he was murdered during a negotiation gone wrong 2 weeks ago. Wanya closed her eyes. "My father wasn't the only one they silenced. That map, it shows where the weapons are, where they hid the bodies, where the bribes went." She clutched her side in pain. "If I die, the truth dies too." Elias stared into the fire. He had spent 6 years trying to outrun guilt and ghosts. Now the truth had knocked on his door, bleeding and half frozen, and he'd let it in. That night, Elias sat by lamplight with the map spread across the table. The ink had faded in parts, but the symbols were sharp, military precision disguised in native markings. He clutched topography, a river bend, a ridgeline, a mill long since abandoned. He reached for his magnifying glass. Dozens of small circles dotted the parchment. Some were marked with X's, others had notations in both Lakota and sloppy English. Fort Carter appeared twice, once circled in red, once with a symbol beside it, a key over crossed rifles. "Storage," Elias muttered, "or something worth guarding." He scanned further and found a scribbled phrase in faint pencil. "Deliver to Bledsoe, trade for gold and hides." His heart slowed. Captain Silas Bledsoe, Fort Carter's commanding officer. Elias had met the man once, lean, clean, and hungry, the kind of soldier who shook hands with one eye on your pockets. And if Bledsoe's name was tied to this... Elias leaned back in the chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "This isn't just corruption," he whispered. "It's treason." He looked over at Wanya, still resting in the corner bed, breathing shallowly. This map, these names, weren't just evidence. They were a kill list. The truth is often the most dangerous thing. If this story moves you, hit subscribe to follow their fight for what's right. He turned the map over. There, faintly embossed into the leather backing, was something else. Initials, R.H., Red Horse, her father's mark. Elias stared at it like it had weight. It did.
This man had died trying to deliver a message, and the girl, his daughter, had almost been buried with it. Elias looked back at the storage symbol beside Fort Carter. Something was hidden there. Guns, most likely. Maybe ledgers. Maybe bodies. He didn't know yet. But someone was trading American weapons for bribes and killing anyone who got too close. His fingers tightened around the paper's edge. "I don't want to be part of this," he muttered. But truth didn't ask permission. It just showed up, bleeding. He spent hours cross-referencing the landmarks on the map with what he remembered from his scouting days. Some sites were old logging depots, others marked only by creek bends and ridge codes known to soldiers. Each circle wasn't a place, it was a transaction. Dates, initials, codes, and beside several entries, check in red, delivered, completed. And then, near the corner of the map, a series of small dots leading west. A trail, marked with the word diverted. His eyes narrowed. Someone had rerouted a shipment, likely the last one, the one Red Horse tried to stop. The location it pointed to? An old barn Elias once knew, burned in the war, rebuilt as a mule station, abandoned now. But according to this, it was a drop site. Suddenly the symbol of the crossed rifles at Fort Carter took on new meaning. This wasn't rogue soldiers. This was a network. From Fort Carter outward, trade routes, hideouts, codes, kills. And Captain Bledsoe wasn't just a cog. He was the broker. A knock sounded faintly at the back of Elias's skull, an old instinct he'd tried to drown in solitude. "You're in it now, McKenna. This isn't just about the girl. It's about what she carried, and what they'll do to keep it buried." He folded the map carefully, returned it to the pouch, and placed it under a floorboard beneath the stove. Then he sat back and stared at the fire. The orange glow flickered over the rifles on the wall, the worn boots at the door, the old uniform folded on the shelf like a ghost waiting to be summoned. He hadn't worn it since Gettysburg, but something told him he'd need it soon. He looked over at Wanya again, her brow glistening with sweat. She wasn't just in danger. She was the last living voice of a dead truth. And they were going to try and silence her again, unless he got there first. They came just after noon the next day. 3 men on horseback, government-issued coats, carbines slung low, and 2 clean boots for ranch work. The lead rider wore a cavalry hat, star badge on the breast, and a look Elias had seen before. Military polish over something mean. "Afternoon," the man called as he dismounted. "Sorry to trouble you Elias McKenna?" Elias stepped under the porch slowly, rifle held by the barrel, casual. "Depends who's askin'." "Sergeant Cooper, Fort Carter Detachment. We're looking for a missing mare. Slipped the line 3 nights back. Brown coat, white mark on the chest." "Can't help you," Elias said flatly. "Ain't seen any strays." The sergeant smiled, too wide. "Mind if we water the horses? Long ride up here." Elias gestured toward the creek out back. "Plenty there. Cold, too." One of the troopers stayed back, eyeing the cabin. The other led the horses off. Cooper didn't move. "You live out here alone?" Elias shrugged. "Always have." "You ain't been to town in weeks, not since the frost. Ain't that right?" Elias didn't answer. Cooper glanced at the cabin again. "You wouldn't mind if we took a quick look around, would you?" Now Elias smiled. Thin, sharp. "I would." For a second, neither man blinked. Then Cooper nodded, slow. Didn't mean offense, just routine. The 2 men turned, mounted up, and rode off. But they didn't head south toward Fort Carter. They circled around behind the ridge, where no creek flowed. Elias waited until they were gone, then stepped inside. Wanya hadn't moved. He pulled up the floorboards behind the stove, beneath the old flour barrels, and helped her inside, wrapping her in grain sacks. Micah used to hide there, from thunderstorms, from nightmares. Now another child was hiding from men with stars on their chests. And thunder was coming again. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat in the dark with his rifle across his knees, listening to the wind roll down from the northern ridge. The soldiers would be back. Not to talk this time. He'd seen the twitch in Cooper's jaw, the way the third man kept eyeing the chimney, the boots by the door. They weren't searching for a horse. They were hunting someone. And he'd just told them where to look. By morning, Wanya's fever had broken, but she was too weak to stand. "We don't have time," he muttered, pacing the floor. "I can't move her fast, and I can't fight off a platoon." He stopped at the desk, dug through the bottom drawer, and pulled out an old tin box. Inside, flint, dry moss, and a bundle of soaked cedar twigs tied in red thread. A smoke signal. He hadn't used one since the Dakota campaign of '66. But one man might still be watching. Ashen. They'd served together briefly, Elias as a scout, Ashen as a tracker conscripted by the army before deserting to return to his people. Last he heard, Ashen had become a sub-chief among the northern bands. Elias stepped outside, climbed the ridge behind the cabin, and built a quick tower of moss and twigs. He lit the fire. Black smoke curled skyward, 2 columns, then a pause, then one more. The old code. Danger. Urgent. Friend in need. He waited. By sunset, the smoke was gone, but the sky to the north held a faint glow, a flicker like firelight in answer. He climbed back down, heart pounding. Ashen had seen. Now it was only a matter of time. Time before help arrived, or death did. Inside, Wanya stirred and whispered, "They're coming, aren't they?" Elias knelt beside her and nodded. "But so am I," he said.
Every damn inch of the way. He loaded every rifle in the house and nailed the front door shut. The first shot came just after midnight. Elias was on the porch, crouched low behind a stack of chopped firewood, when the bullet snapped through the air and bit into the wall above his head. He didn't flinch. He'd been waiting. With a flick of the wrist, he pulled the tripwire taut across the yard. Then he crawled low toward the barn. Another shot rang out, closer. They were moving fast now. He counted at least 6 voices, scattered but closing in, boots crunching over frost, the faint clink of cartridge belts. Then a sharp scream, metal against bone. The first trap had sprung. A soldier went down in the dark, caught in the bear snare Elias had buried beneath the dead leaves. Chaos. Elias used it. He slipped around the back of the barn and fired once, clean, into the chest of a man climbing the fence. The body hit the ground with a thud. No time to think, no time to feel. The cabin was their target. Wanaya was the prize. He had to keep them outside. He tossed an old lantern into the pig pen, igniting the kerosene he'd soaked into the straw. Flames burst high, lighting the yard in a wash of orange and shadow. Another soldier ducked behind the chicken coop. Elias clipped his leg, then vanished into the smoke. He moved like the ghosts he used to hunt, swift, silent, angry. From the trees behind the house, a voice shouted, "Inside, now!" They were making their push. Elias grabbed the rope ladder he'd nailed to the side of the shed and climbed to the roof. 3 of them rushed the porch. He lit the fuse of an old powder horn, dropped it from above. Boom! The porch exploded in fire and splinters. Screams tore through the dark. He didn't wait to hear who survived. He was already loading again. The night fell quiet. Only the crackling fire in the pig pen still whispered in the darkness. Elias moved through the smoke like a wolf, silent and sharp-eyed. He counted bodies. 1 near the barn, 2 by the porch, one still tangled in the snare. But something was off, too quiet, too few. Then, a sudden crunch behind the tool shed. Elias spun, rifle raised, just as a figure lunged from the shadows. The two crashed into the dirt, struggling. Elias slammed an elbow into the man's face, rolled, and fired point blank. The soldier dropped, still breathing, barely. Elias knelt, pressing the barrel to the man's chest. "Why?" he demanded. "Who gave the order?" The man choked, blood in his mouth. His uniform was standard issue, except for a black patch stitched behind the lapel. Bledsoe's mark. "Orders," he gasped. "Kill everyone. Burn the place. No survivors." "Why?" "Girl. Knows too much. Fort Carter. Dirty. Map. Can't get out." His voice faded, eyes glassed over. Elias sat back, breath heaving. So it was real, not just corruption. A sanctioned cover-up, a hit job from inside the army. He looked around the yard. Blood smeared in the snow, flames flickering in the distance, and the smell of powder thick in his lungs. His home was a war zone. And they'd be back, stronger, smarter. He stood, dragged the wounded man to the edge of the barn, and tied his wrists. Maybe he'd live, maybe not. But if he did, Elias would need his word. He limped back into the cabin. Juanilla was sitting up now, pale but alert, rifle in her lap. "You fought them off?" she whispered. "For now." She looked at him, really looked. The soot on his face, the blood on his shirt. "You could have run," she said. "I did," Elias muttered, "for 6 years." He dropped a fresh round into the chamber, locked it tight. But not anymore. By dawn, the blood on the snow had turned black and brittle. Elias stood at the edge of the porch, rifle slung over his shoulder, boots crusted with ash. The smoke from the barn had drifted far enough to catch attention. Maybe from Fort Carter, maybe worse. Inside, Juanilla coughed, hard. He rushed back in. Her face was flushed, damp with sweat, and her breath came in short, broken bursts. The bullet wound had reopened, maybe from the struggle, maybe from fever setting in deeper. He unwrapped the bandage and hissed. Infection. Fast. Spreading. He boiled water, crushed herbs, used every trick he'd learned from the old battlefield medics, but nothing slowed the shaking. "You need a doctor," he muttered. "No," she whispered through chattering teeth. "No towns, no soldiers." "I'm not taking you to a town," Elias replied, jaw tight. "I'm taking you to Fort Carter." Her eyes widened in horror. "That's suicide." "Maybe," Elias said. He poured whiskey over his hands, then pressed a hot knife to the wound. Juanilla screamed, bit down on leather. When it was done, she lay limp, her pulse fluttering like a moth in his palm. He stared at her, at the girl who'd crawled out of the snow with the truth clutched to her chest. At the cabin, no longer a sanctuary, but a smoking beacon. They would come again. And next time, there would be more than 8. He opened the old trunk by the hearth, pulled out a satchel, and began packing. Ammo, dried meat, water, the map. He looked at the weather-worn photograph tucked in the corner. A boy with straw-blonde hair and a gap-toothed grin. "Micah," he whispered, eyes burning. "You died trying to be brave. Maybe now it's my turn." He closed the trunk, and with it the last bit of safety this place had ever offered. By noon, Elias had saddled the old bay mare and rigged a sled from firewood slats and tarp. Juanilla lay inside, swaddled in every blanket he owned, her breath shallow but steady. He lashed the satchel to the saddle horn, ammo, map, compass, and one last bottle of quinine. Then he stepped out to the ridge to check for movement. That's when he saw it. Smoke signals. 3 bursts, then pause, then one long. Message received. Help sent. He came down to find the man waiting at the tree line, cloaked in furs, bow across his back, and 3 silent riders flanking him. They embraced without words. Ashen looked at the sled, then at Elias. "Fort Carter?" he asked, voice grave. Elias nodded. The Lakota warrior studied his face. "You are either a fool or a fire." "I've been both," Elias said, "but not today." Ashen handed him a carved wooden token, a hawk with wings outstretched. "Show this to any of mine," he said. "They'll know you walk with truth." Elias took it, tucked it into his coat. "You'll die in there," Ashen warned. "But if you don't, this land may live." Elias looked out over the valley, the frozen creek, the ridgeline, the place where Micah once chased fireflies. "Then dying won't be the worst thing." Ashen placed a hand on his shoulder, then vanished into the trees with his riders. Elias stood alone for a long moment, then mounted. Snow had begun to fall again, fine, sharp flakes. He pulled his hat low, clicked his tongue, and the mare moved forward, dragging the sled behind. Toward Fort Carter. Toward death. Or something bigger. The gates of Fort Carter loomed like a gallows in the midday sun. Elias rode up slow, shoulders straight, coat clean, hat low. The makeshift sled behind him bumped across the hard earth. Wanya hidden beneath canvas, wrapped in silence. Atop the wall, a young sentry called out, "Name and business." Elias raised a hand in calm salute. "Elijah Duncan, special envoy from the Cheyenne Land Board." A pause, then murmurs. Then the gates groaned open. 2 soldiers stepped out, rifles half raised. "You don't look Cheyenne," one muttered. "I'm not," Elias said. "I work the papers." He handed over a forged document, ink still damp from that morning. It bore the seal of the Territorial Land Office and a signature that once belonged to a real clerk now buried in Kansas. The guard squinted, turned to the other. "They're expecting someone?" The second man shrugged. "We've been swapping land like poker chips lately." They waved him in. Elias rode through the gates, heart pounding like a drum in his ears. Inside, Fort Carter was a mix of order and dust. Rows of barracks, supply wagons, soldiers drilling under shouted orders. To any eye, it was just another army post. But he knew better. He saw the extra guards posted near the northern warehouse. He saw 2 crates being loaded with markings covered in black pitch. And he saw the look on a lieutenant's face when their eyes met. Tight, alert, suspicious. He pulled the mare left, toward the stables. Time was short. Elias tied the mare at the far end of the stable, where shadows pooled thickest. He climbed down, checked the tarp. When Yanya was still breathing, barely stirring. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "I'll be back before the frost sets in." She blinked once. That was enough. He slung the satchel over his shoulder and moved toward the north end of the fort, staying close to the blind spots between the barracks and supply wagons. Every creak of leather, every crunch of gravel under his boots felt like thunder. But nobody stopped him. Not yet. The warehouse loomed ahead, an ugly structure of timber and rusted hinges. 2 soldiers stood guard at the main door, bored and half-frozen. Elias didn't go near them. Instead, he circled around the side and found what he hoped for, a loose plank near the foundation. He pried it open with his belt knife and slipped inside. Darkness swallowed him. He waited, listened. Silence. Then he lit a match. Crates, dozens. Stamped with army seals, but underneath, fresh markings in Lakota script. Misspelled. Fake. He cracked one open. Repeating rifles, new, oiled, not standard issue. Another crate held cartridges, and beneath those, gold coins in foreign mint. Prussian. His breath caught. This wasn't just arms smuggling, it was foreign trade. Treason. In the corner, a ledger lay open on a crate. He flipped through it. "Delivery to Bledsoe. 400 rifles, paid in buffalo hides and mineral rights." Names, coordinates, shipment dates, forts across the frontier.
He memorized what he could, then slipped the page with the gold seal into his satchel. Behind him, a board creaked. He froze, held his breath. Nothing. But the air had changed. Someone new. He backed out through the gap, replaced the plank, and melted into the shadows. As he reached the edge of the stable again, a sharp voice barked from the far side of the yard. "You, stop!" Elias didn't turn. He stepped behind the barn and ran. Elias barely made it 3 steps before a rifle butt slammed into his back. He hit the dirt hard, rolled, reached for his belt. Too late. 3 soldiers surrounded him, rifles drawn. "Name," one barked. Elias didn't answer. A boot landed in his ribs. Another. They dragged him upright, blood trickling from his nose. From across the parade ground, a voice rang out, sharp, clipped, commanding. "Bring him to me." The crowd of soldiers parted as a tall man in a tailored officer's coat stepped forward. Gold buttons gleamed beneath his black greatcoat, and a scar ran down his left cheek like a lightning bolt. Captain Everett Bledsoe. His eyes were cold and calculating as he looked Elias over. "I know you," Bledsoe said. "You're the hermit from Red Creek." Elias spat blood. "You've got a good memory for a man who's forgotten the law." Bledsoe smirked. "Search him." They did, rough hands stripping the satchel from his back, tearing it open. The gold-sealed ledger page fell to the ground. Bledsoe picked it up, read it. Then his smile vanished. He looked up, his voice low and laced with steel. "Where is the girl?" Elias said nothing. The captain stepped closer, nose to nose. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." "I know exactly what I stepped into," Elias growled. "A pit full of cowards selling rifles to murderers."
You kill peace talks, blame the Lakota, and line your pockets while children bleed. Gasps. A few soldiers exchanged glances. Bledsoe's jaw clenched. "You think that gets you a medal?" he hissed. "No, it gets you a firing squad." Elias stared him down. "I've faced worse men than you, Captain, and they're all buried." For a moment, the yard was silent. Then Bledsoe turned to his men. "Put him in the holding pit. At dawn tomorrow, we make an example of him." Elias didn't flinch. He'd delivered the first blow, and now the clock was ticking. They shoved Elias into a timber pit behind the barracks. No roof, just 4 damp walls and a grate above. By the time the heavy latch slammed shut, blood had dried on his lip, and one eye had started to swell. Night fell fast. From below, he could hear boots marching overhead. Laughter, metal clanking. He leaned his back against the wall and stared up at the stars beyond the grate. Wanya was still out there. Alive, he prayed. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "You should have kept to your cattle, old man." Bledsoe. The captain stood above the pit, hands behind his back, like a priest at a grave. "You think this little crusade of yours matters?" he sneered. "The deals are already done. The gold's already spent." Elias smiled through cracked teeth. "Funny thing about truth. It tends to rot the wood beneath power." Bledsoe's face darkened. "At noon tomorrow, we'll gather every soldier in this fort. They'll watch you fall, and they'll know what happens to traitors and Indian lovers." Elias chuckled. "Then I hope you've got a fast speech, Captain, 'cause by the time the bullets fly, someone's gonna start asking questions." Above them, a young soldier lingered a moment too long before walking away. Bledsoe caught the movement, eyes narrowing, but he said nothing more. He turned and disappeared into the night. Elias slumped down, breathing slow, conserving energy. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring.
But he knew this. He had ripped a crack in the walls of Fort Carter, and sometimes all it took was a crack to let the storm in.
Will this spark ignite a fire or be extinguished by the darkness? Subscribe to witness the courage that changes everything. The noon sun bore down like judgment. Elias stood in the center of the parade yard, wrists bound, a firing post behind him. Soldiers circled in rows, some tight-lipped, others whispering uneasily. Captain Bledsoe strutted before them like a rooster fat with pride. "Let this be a warning," he declared, voice loud and rehearsed. "To spies, to traitors, and to those who consort with savages." Elias said nothing. He stood tall, bruised and bleeding, but unbroken. A lieutenant stepped forward, rifle in hand, nodding grimly. Then, hoofbeats. Not one, not 10, dozens. All heads turned toward the northern gate. Fort Carter had no scheduled drills that day. A dust cloud rose from the ridgeline, and then they saw them, 40 Lakota warriors, faces painted, braids whipping in the wind, riding two abreast beneath a tattered but unmistakable white flag stretched on buffalo hide. At their lead rode Standing Bear, broad-shouldered and stern-eyed, draped in a ceremonial mantle of elk hide and eagle feathers. Bledsoe's face went pale. "Raise arms," he barked, "sound the alarm." But before the order could echo, Standing Bear raised a hand, then dismounted slowly, deliberately. The others followed suit, not a single weapon drawn. They marched into the yard in silence, circling Elias, not with spears, but with memory. One by one, they began to speak, names, not in anger, but in reverence. Names of Lakota leaders murdered in so-called negotiations. Names that had vanished in government reports, buried under phrases like accidental engagement or regrettable skirmish. Each name cut the air like a bell. The soldiers held their rifles, but none lifted them. Bledsoe shouted, "This is an act of war." Standing Bear turned to him.
"This is a funeral," he said in English, "for those your men slaughtered under white flags." Then he looked to the crowd. "You wanted peace? Here is truth. You want silence? Then shoot us all, now." The yard held its breath, and something inside the ranks shifted. A finger trembled on a trigger, then lowered. The wind shifted, and from the edge of the crowd a quiet voice rang out, unsteady but clear. His name was Wakasa Tonka. Heads turned. Wanya, wrapped in Elias's old wool coat, stepped forward. Her hair still matted with blood, one arm bandaged tight. But her back was straight, her eyes blazing. She walked slowly to the center of the yard, holding three things: a hand-drawn map, edges scorched; a worn leather pouch bearing the Whitaker family seal. Elias had found it on her when he rescued her; and her father's necklace, still stained with dried blood. She stopped beside Elias and for a moment laid a hand on his arm. Then she turned to the soldiers. "My father was a chief," she said in a trembling voice. "He came to the treaty table with no weapons, only with hope." She held up the map. "This shows where they were taken, where rifles were hidden, where men in blue uniforms traded promises for gold." Murmurs swept the crowd. She held up the necklace. "This was in my father's hand when they shot him, a gift from the white man who believed in peace." She stepped forward, facing Captain Bledsoe directly. "You murdered him." Bledsoe scoffed. "She's lying. They're all lying." But no one moved. Wanya opened the pouch and took out a folded paper, frayed and ink-stained. "This is his last will, written in Lakota, signed with his mark and blood. He said if he died, I must bring it to the fort, so his words could live." She began to read aloud, slow, deliberate, each syllable etched with pain. It spoke of betrayal, of hope,
of two worlds that might one day learn to trust. And it named names, including Everett Bledsoe. Silence fell.
A rifle clattered to the ground, then another. Elias watched, stunned, as a sergeant stepped forward and muttered, "I didn't sign up to kill peace." Others nodded. One by one, soldiers began to lower their guns. Bledsoe's face twisted into fury, but he was alone. Bledsoe's face was stone, but his voice cracked. "This is mutiny," he barked, stepping forward, trying to reclaim authority. "You are soldiers of the United States Army, not a damn peace circle." He scanned the faces in front of him, familiar but suddenly unreadable. "Pick up your rifles," he growled. "That's an order." But none moved. Then a tremble in the silence. "I remember what he said that night," came a voice from the back. It was Private Harlan, barely out of boyhood, freckles and fear on his face. He said, "Let the savages bleed. There's gold coming when we clear the land." Another soldier muttered, "He told us this fort wasn't just for peace, it was for profit." A third, grim-faced sergeant stepped forward, said the ranchers were next, once the Lakota were out of the way. Now the silence cracked into a ripple of voices. Elias, though still bound, stood straighter, his eyes locked on Bledsoe, watching a man unravel. "You lied to them," he said evenly. "Used their honor to mask your greed." Bledsoe turned on him, voice sharp. "You shut your mouth." "No," Elias replied. "You shut your mouth when you ordered children buried in snow to make your war look justified." A collective inhale. Bledsoe's eyes twitched. "You think this changes anything? These men won't side with a traitor and a half-blood girl." But the eyes around him weren't angry anymore. They were ashamed. Cornered, Bledsoe's face contorted, not with guilt, but fury. He reached beneath his coat and drew his revolver, barrel glinting in the sun. The crowd stiffened. He didn't point it at the warriors. He didn't point it at the soldiers who now whispered mutiny. He pointed at Elias.
"You think words can save you, rancher?" he hissed. "Let's see if the truth stops a bullet." Wanya stepped forward, a cry stuck in her throat. Time seemed to slow. Elias didn't flinch. He stared death in the eye. Again. The pistol cocked. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but no one moved. Except her. Wanya stepped forward, faster than anyone expected, her hand diving into the folds of her coat. A glint of bone. A Lakota throwing dart, small, swift, and silent. She whipped it forward, guided not by anger, but by desperation. It struck true. The dart buried itself into Bledsoe's hand, forcing the pistol from his grip just as his finger pulled. The gun clattered to the ground, harmless. Bledsoe screamed, staggering back, clutching his bleeding palm. And that's when Elias moved. Despite his age, despite the bruises and the blood, he surged forward with a fury honed not by rage, but by righteousness. His fist collided with Bledsoe's jaw in a crack that echoed across the yard. The captain collapsed into the dust like a broken idol. Silence, total and absolute. Then a voice, Private Harlan again. "What do we do now?" A grizzled sergeant stepped forward, picked up the pistol, and threw it away. "We start by disarming the liar." Two men stepped forward and hoisted Bledsoe to his knees, ripping the insignia from his coat. He thrashed, spat, screamed. "You're all finished! I had orders!" "No," Elias said firmly. "You had a choice, and you chose to sell honor for coin." Wanya knelt, eyes level with Bledsoe's. "You killed my father, but the truth didn't die with him." Her voice trembled. "It stands here."
One by one, the soldiers lowered their heads, not in shame, but in solemn recognition. A moment later, someone began to clap. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't celebratory. It was acknowledgement of justice, of survival, of truth. And then the entire courtyard joined in. Not loud, but steady, like drums before a new dawn. The flags came down. Fort Carter, once a symbol of military dominance on the northern plains, was officially disbanded within a fortnight. What was once a fortress of fear became a hollow shell of its former self, its gates unguarded, its walls no longer echoing with barked orders or the tension of war. The U.S. government, facing public outrage and pressure from within its own ranks, had no choice but to act. Testimonies from soldiers, the bravery of Elias McKenna, and Wanya's unwavering truth forced the Army to acknowledge its complicity in the illegal arms trade. Captain Bledsoe was arrested and dishonorably discharged, awaiting trial in Washington. Though his punishment could never match the lives destroyed, justice had found its first foothold. But Elias? He didn't go back to his ranch. He stayed. Right there, on the very stretch of land between the broken walls of Fort Carter and the Lakota hunting grounds, he began to rebuild something new. They called it the Healing Border Post. No rifles, no uniforms, no walls. Just a single wooden building with two doors, one facing east toward the settlers and the new frontier, the other facing west toward the sacred hills of the Lakota. Inside, there was no registrar for bloodlines, no questions of allegiance, just a fire always burning, clean beds of hay and cotton, herbs hanging from the rafters, and silence broken only by the soft murmurs of care. Elias used his field medic knowledge to treat the wounded from both worlds, Lakota hunters caught in traps, settlers with snake bites, orphaned children burning with fever. Word spread fast, and soon they came, on foot, on horseback, from both sides, crossing old lines not for war, but for healing. Some scoffed at the idea of neutrality, others feared a trap. But over time, the place became something undeniable, a symbol that some lines weren't meant to divide, but to connect. When a scout from Fort Lincoln visited weeks later, he asked Elias, "What the hell is this place supposed to be?" Elias, now wearing a worn canvas apron, answered plainly, "A line that no longer needs defending." And then he turned back to the child coughing in the corner, gently dabbing her forehead with cool water, while Wanya brewed medicine from dried roots. The war wasn't over, but something else had begun. Wanya never left. After the hearings, after the Army pulled back and the fort was repurposed, many thought she'd return to the Black Hills to be with her people. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed in the quiet valley with Elias, where the wind carried less anger and the days bled into one another like brushstrokes on canvas. They weren't lovers. That would have cheapened what they became. They were survivors. Wanya, once a chief's daughter, now tended to wounds and brewed salves from herbs Elias had never seen before. She began teaching him the ways of the earth, how to read the trees for sickness, how to calm a horse with nothing but touch, how to speak with the quiet confidence of someone who'd already lived through death. Elias, in turn, taught her English, not just words, but books. She loved Dickinson's poetry and Lincoln's speeches, though she often laughed at their long-winded metaphors. Their conversations were slow and deliberate. Sometimes they said nothing at all, and that was enough. Wanya started carving small animals from driftwood. Elias hung them over the doorway of the healing post. She once gave him a carving of a white wolf, its head bowed, its eyes solemn. "That's you," she said simply. From that day on, some children, Lakota and settler alike, began calling him Uncle White Wolf. He never corrected them.
There were quiet rituals between them, lighting the lanterns at dusk, sorting the roots by moon cycle, telling stories by firelight, not to entertain, but to remember.
One night, as winter returned and frost crept over the cabin's windows, Wanya sat by the hearth and asked, "Do you ever miss being alone?" Elias looked at the flames for a long time before answering. "No," he said. "I used to think silence was peace, but I was just afraid of being heard." Wanya nodded. "Now you are." Not everything healed, but some things did. Enough to keep going. Years passed. The building never grew any taller. No fancy shingles, no painted signs swinging in the wind. Just wood, worn smooth by time and touch. But something about the healing border post made people stop. First out of curiosity, then out of trust. Settlers from far ranches came with their sick, guided not by maps but by stories. Lakota mothers sent their sons with tokens of peace, leather bracelets, carved feathers, small pouches of sweetgrass. No weapons crossed the threshold. It became known as a place where the war stopped, not because of treaties, but because no one dared carry hate through that door. People left behind something every time they came. A broken spur, a letter never sent, a name whispered to the fire and let go. And Elias kept all of it, not to collect, but to remember. One day, a boy no older than 10 came alone, his sister burning with fever wrapped across his back. His family had fled a raid. Their wagon was gone. He had walked 2 days. When Elias opened the door, the boy didn't ask for help. He just said, "They said you'd care." Wanya lifted the girl gently, checked her pulse, and laid her near the fire. The boy looked up at the old man and asked, "Is it true you were a soldier?" Elias didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. "I was, once. Now I fight for something else." Later that week, Elias carved a new sign from the last board of his old ranch gate. It took him 3 days, but when it was done, he hung it high above the door. In letters neither fancy nor perfect, it read, "This is a place where no one asks the color of your skin, only how deep your wound is and whether you want it healed." People came just to see the words. Some cried, some took off their hats. One Lakota elder, bent with age, stood before it and said, "This place will outlive both of you." He was right. Long after Elias and Wanya were gone, the cabin still stood. The wind still passed through the rafters. The fire still burned, kept alive by those who came after. Some doctors, some warriors, some just wanderers who'd once been healed there. But they all knew. It began with one man, one girl, and one choice not to look away. Sometimes history doesn't change with a war cry or a gunshot. Sometimes it begins in the silence of a snow-covered night, when one man chooses not to walk away. Elias McKenna wasn't a hero by birth. He was just a tired soul with scars no one could see. But when the world gave him a chance to look the other way, he looked closer instead. He didn't save Wanya to rewrite history. He did it because it was right, because compassion costs less than regret, and because, deep down, he believed that even broken man can still build something whole. Today, we may not live near borders drawn by treaties, but we carry boundaries in our minds between race, belief, politics, and pain. Maybe the lesson of Elias is this: when someone knocks on your door, wounded, different, afraid, don't ask who they are, ask how you can help. Because sometimes a single act of kindness becomes the spark that heals 100 wounds. This is one of many true Wild West stories, not just about cowboys and guns, but about courage, choice, and the kind of humanity that still matters today. If this story moved you, subscribe and join us for more untold legends that shape the West and still shape us.